From 13 ABC, Conklin and Company, with 13 ABC Action News anchor Lee Conklin. First, with what's happening behind the headlines. And Take 3, our panel of political analysts.
Morning, everybody. Welcome into another edition of Conklin and Company. Today on the program, the run for the White House. Eric Holder on the hot seat. Do his troubles translate to troubles for the president's re-election bid? Joe the Plumber's controversial video, and texting while driving. A local city looking to take the newly adopted law here in Ohio a step further. But first, the G20 summit concluding this week. What came of it? What about its impact going forward across the globe and close to home here in Northwest Ohio? 13 ABC Washington Bureau Chief Jacqueline Policastro was the only local reporter traveling to Los Cabos, Mexico. She's back in Washington today and joins us on Conklin and Company this morning to talk about the G20. Jacqueline, good to see you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Okay, first of all, your impressions. You're there with the leaders of the 20 largest world economies. It's President Obama, Vladimir Putin, just to name a few. Your impressions, an overview of the G20 that you attended this past week.
Well, Lee, I have to tell you, there really weren't any big groundbreaking decisions that came out of the G20 summit. That might be disappointing for some people, but it's really the reality behind most of these types of meetings. There was a lot of talk about, of course, trade and, of course, about the economy, the global economy. What does that really mean for Ohio? Well, eventually, those types of decisions that are made at summits like the G20 do trickle down to places like Toledo, Ohio, do trickle down to what it means to bring jobs back to places like Toledo. But again, overview, there really wasn't a big groundbreaking decision. Okay,
what was there one thing that you can point to though, Jacqueline, that you said, oh, that's really interesting. I could see where that would translate to the global economy and something that might be more of a local impact. Was there one thing that you can point to? Not huge, but just one thing.
Well, extending some things on trade definitely will affect people in Ohio. That's one of the most important issues. Even when I talk to lawmakers back here, I talk to Senator Portman and Senator Brown and Congresswoman Capter and Congressman Latta about all of this, and that's one of the issues that they point to. They also talk about the fact, though, that they'd like to see more talk about our economy here. So even though those world leaders are out there talking about trade, the reality is things like the debt and deficit here need to be resolved first, they believe anyway, before any real headway can be made. But I'd have to say talks on trade would be the number one thing that will eventually affect people in Ohio.
All right. And also the European financial situation in crisis right now, the Eurozone. The market reacts daily to what is happening in Europe. Can you feel the tension? Is it palpable about, one at the G20, but also in Washington, about what happens across the pond in terms of their economy?
Yeah, it's definitely palpable for sure. One thing that I noticed the president said that really stuck out to me is he basically said those problems aren't going to be fixed here in the United States. They're definitely going to be fixed in Europe. And he put the blame back over there. So while all these leaders are definitely getting together, the president made sure, and I don't know if it's because it's election year or because in general it isn't a decision that maybe can be fixed by the United States, but definitely the blame is sort of staying on the other side of the pond for now. But it's a problem that's affecting all of us and something that there's no way the United States can ignore. And yes, that tension is palpable for sure.
This is more on, let's pull back the curtain of the G20 and where you were. I mean, beautiful shots of Los Cabos, so incredible resort. You've got all these world leaders, of course the Secret Service is there, and all the security in place. But if you can, give us a sense of what it was like to cover an event like that, the body language you saw from the president and the other world leaders. What were your personal observations?
Well, I think first off, there's a big divide between what people think we do and what we actually do. You mentioned those beautiful beach shots. Well, we were really only outside for maybe an hour a day. The rest of the time is spent inside the White House press corps area, and it's a hot, sweaty, small room. To give you an idea, when the president had his press conference, this is literally how the day went. Left our hotel at 9 a.m., got in a cab to go to another hotel, and then from that hotel got to another hotel, walked to yet another hotel, then sat on a bus for 2 hours before even getting to the site and going through security again. His presser was at 5:30 in the afternoon. Get that, from 9 to 5:30 just to hear the president talk for 20 minutes. That's the reality of behind the scenes covering an event like this. You asked me about body language, though. That was one of those stories that made national news. Of course, Vladimir Putin and President Obama. What was that body language really like? To be fair, I can't tell you because I didn't see it firsthand. The press pool, which are the individuals that actually have the direct access there, they bring that information back to us. After sitting in front of Vladimir Putin for a half hour and watching his body language during a press conference, my gut check is probably that it really wasn't anything out of the ordinary. A lot of the times, those are the things that spin into the national spotlight. It seems like, and from many of the people that I've talked to that cover Putin on a more regular basis, that there really wasn't anything too out of the ordinary. But you know, for the reporters that were there in the room, they thought that it was something that was important to mention.
Yeah,
fascinating. So it's hard to exactly say.
It is fascinating.
Absolutely.
Final thoughts. You're back in Washington now, and we'll address this with our Take 3 panel in just a minute. But Eric Holder, fast and furious. I don't want to throw this at you, but I wanted to ask you about tension there and what it means for the president. What you're hearing in Washington when you talk to a Portman or a Brown. You know, what's the feeling going forward on Eric Holder, and will he be found in contempt of Congress?
It's hard for me to answer that exactly because the reality is I really don't know. And I have not talked specifically to Portman or Brown about this issue just yet, but it's definitely something that I will be looking into, and I'll let you know what they do say. One thing that I can say as far as how it affects the president, he's going to distance himself from this as much as he can. It's an election year. This is not an issue that anyone really wants to talk about too close to the White House. So we're really going to have to wait to see what exactly Congress does. And I can't really say from the perspective of the senators just yet exactly how they feel about it, but I'll be sure to talk to them about that.
Fair enough. You handled that one very well, Jacqueline. Very, very well. And we appreciate you talking to us on Conklin and Company. And we'll talk to you again as you continue to cover this election, the election moving forward to November. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Lee. Take care.
Our 13 ABC Washington Bureau Chief Jacqueline Policastro. When we come back in just a minute, texting while driving, taking that law signed by Governor Kasich a step further. We're back in just a minute.